felt myself quite a few times while I was away that weekend thinking that what I had done was just not enough. And really hit hard, and I felt less than.
The great expectations, right? The expectations that we place on ourselves, the expectations that the world places on us, as almost acting like guideposts, right? And so they kind of almost make it a little easier sometimes to navigate because we know here's where you have to be in order to be okay.
We shouldn't underestimate the power of the stories that we tell ourselves.
Welcome to Midlife Unfiltered, a podcast about unapologetically embracing the season of me as we live the lives we want in midlife and beyond. I'm Anita McLachlan.
I'm Erica Webb. We're here to make some noise, say hell no to outdated stereotypes, and hell yes to living life on our terms.
Hey, Erica.
Hey, Anita.
How you doing?
I'm pretty good. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm really well. Thank you. Really, really well. I am excited and torn in some ways for this next episode. When we were planning what we were going to say for the Midlife Unfiltered, the season of me season, for season 1, we knew that we wanted to step off with some really big topics and topics that we felt would be really significant and important to women in midlife, those who are listening. And some of those big topics, this is a really big one. What do you want to say about this one, Erica, leading in?
I feel similarly. I think it's really interesting that we very much felt compelled to talk about shame, right? We're diving into talking about peeling back the layers of shame, talking about the expectations that we have had, I guess, heaped upon our shoulders for the first half of our life.
Yeah.
And yet, even though we both are very willing to have this conversation, I will admit that I also feel a little bit nervous. And I think that that really speaks to why this is so important, because shame has a way of being almost like not a silent narrator, but a invisible narrator in our lives. And that can be a really dangerous thing because we don't see it and hear it and pause long enough to question how that can be driving our lives and perhaps leading us to live in ways that don't feel authentic to us. So, yeah, we're going to go in deep. I mean, it's only episode 2, but we decided we're just going to dive right on in there and talk about shame.
Yeah.
But we're going deep, and we're going there straight away.
Yeah, we are. And what you just said then about questioning, for me, that is probably one of the biggest things I've noticed in midlife right now, is that because I'm 56, I'll be 57 in August, and the questions that are coming up for me now, I think being postmenopausal has a lot to do with it too. That'll come up time and time again, but it's that deep questioning, and it's the wanting to reflect and ask those big questions of myself, and they are big. Big questions like, who am I and what do I want? And yes, there's a lot of shame that bubbles up as part of all that, as part of that reflection and questioning. But I just wanted to reach out, and for the women who are listening right now with us, is that this is part of midlife. Asking the big questions of ourselves, I believe, is very much part of that. And I don't believe it's something that we give ourselves enough time and space to do. So one of my personal wishes for doing this episode, as difficult as it might be at times, is let's go there and let's give ourselves the time and space to reflect on it as well.
I think that's such an important point, is that it does need time and space. It requires it. It's not something that will just kind of sort itself out in the background if we give it long enough, because it's insidious. So I think let's just dive right in. I'm curious, you sort of talked about having these big questions that you're asking of yourself. Who am I? What do I want? Has it been expectations from others or our culture that has made that difficult to perhaps question before? Or what is it that you think has, I guess, limited or does limit our, if we go kind of zoom out a little bit, limits our capacity to already know those things or be those things before we hit midlife?
Yeah, I think definitely in that first act of life, which I sort of say up to about maybe age 30. Very different focus, very different lifestyle, very different expectations about what that should look like. And I think back then, we are in mating mode, looking for a partner, and with that, it it's things like, how do I look in order to attract the person that I want to attract? And then there's the societal expectations around, well, what does the right woman look like? She has to be a certain size, a certain weight, a certain, conduct herself a certain way, be this, be that. And I think, particularly in my world as well, helping other women with their swimwear choices, for example, a whole lot of body shame stuff comes up with those questions because if you don't meet that standard, that expectation, then you fall short, and that's when the shame kicks in, and it's around, size and looks and all of that. So, I think that was that part of my life. Now in this second act, it is quite different because the what's happened to me in this stage of life is very, very different now. I've got older kids,
Mm.
they're leaving home. I've, blown up a mountain in my business, deliberately so. So there's lots of other changes that are going on. And I think that's bubbling up these other sorts of questions that I haven't asked myself so much before.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I wonder if it also just there is the space now to ask those questions. I wonder if, before that, when you're in this phase of, like you said, you were building your business, you were raising kids, you were doing all these things, perhaps there wasn't the same space to ask those questions, I wonder. Um,
Yep.
I know that I certainly feel that too, and I notice myself starting to question it to an extent as well. It shows up for me in lots of different ways, but I kind of think of the big places where I feel those shame stories bubbling up and being willing to question is like the way that I parent, the way that I run a business, the way that I'm in relationship with people. It just seems like there is the opportunity for shame to show up in every single facet of our lives.
Yeah, and probably in places that we don't expect it, right? So,
Mm.
for example, I'll share a shame story here and now, very openly. I was away on a long weekend with some gorgeous friends who I've known for, oh my goodness, we were in our late 20s, early 30s, so 20 odd years. Great girls. And we were in Noosa, we were having a great time, and we were just sharing and catching up. But the shame kicked in for me when quite a few of these girls in the group have gone on to be CEOs, they're C-suite girls, they've, done so much with their corporate careers, and I've chosen a different path. I have been a lot of things in my lifetime, but when I had my kids, I chose to be at home. It suited our lifestyle as well, and I then created my own business around that because that's what I wanted to do. But I felt myself quite a few times while I was away that weekend thinking that what I had done was just not enough. Had I stayed in the corporate world, would I have enjoyed or done or seen that kind of success? Um, Maybe not, but I can't help but wonder maybe yes. Um, but instead I chose a different path and really hit hard and I felt less than because of that. Now, not because of what they said. This was on me. This was my story that I was telling myself because I had absolutely no reason to say it was what they said and did. Absolutely not, because they are beautiful and it is not about them. This is fairly and squarely in my court. But I couldn't believe that I was thinking that way in some ways, but it tormented me for quite a bit. And so much so that when I got home, I was, telling my husband about this wonderful time I'd had away. And I also shared with him how I felt that way about not being successful and not doing enough with my career as they had done. And the look on his face said so much. He could not believe that I thought that about myself. And I think that cut him as well. He was sad for me that I felt that way and shocked. And I'll be honest, I still have those thoughts. They're always there. Um, but yeah, that's been a big shame story for me. Not being enough, not being successful enough, however we choose to define that, I guess.
Mm. Gosh, I hear so much of my own story and what you just said. I have a few shame stories, and that's one of mine as well. I also made that similar choice to stay home when my kids were at school, and um, have gone down the build my own business path, which really does lend itself to some shame because it is such a different path that really calls into question your ability to just carve your own way. Um, I have so many things I wanna say kind of in response to what you've just shared, and so my brain's kind of going off in all these different directions. There's almost an element of what if in what you're saying, right? Like this sort of idea
Yeah.
of like, what if I had followed this path? I have so many moments of that in my history as well, and we used to work in the corporate world, and I actually left before I had kids because I just hated it. I hated the
Right.
environment. I felt very, burned out very, very quickly in that environment, and so I left. And there's on some days I can look at that and I can say, "Wow, what a beautiful gift I gave myself to say, 'This is not where I wanna be.'" And then on another day, that same voice will say, "Yeah, but think of the money that you could have made, the difference that you could have made, the career you could have built. And here you are still internally floundering over all these questions," right? So I really, really resonate with that deeply. And it's interesting to me that you're saying that those thoughts are still there. You
Mm.
got the confirmation from your husband that, like, wow, you don't need to necessarily believe that. But I think that's a really important point um to kind of point out is that the shame can still be there under the surface, even when we've
Mm.
looked at it and said, huh, I don't think I want to buy into that story. Because
Mm.
there's probably also I know, not probably, there are so many beautiful things that came from those choices as well. And so I think shame can be a little bit of it can be a cruel beast because it lies to us and shows us just the what ifs, just the ways that we've sort of maybe fallen short to some external comparison, but it doesn't ever show us, but hey, remember this. Remember what you were able to achieve or do or experience, which is cruel, I think.
It is cruel. It's like it stokes the flame just a little bit, like it blows a bit of oxygen on it just to keep it there, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, yeah. I think you're right, and I think living with that and, being aware of that, is a really important thing to be able to do for yourself because otherwise, oh geez, I'd be really beating myself up a hell of a lot more than what I do, and it took being in that environment with those beautiful girls to actually bring that up even higher within me, those feelings. I do have them from time to time around running a small business and, am I contributing enough for the family, for income and all the rest of it? Um, but yeah, I wouldn't say it's daily, but it's quite frequent. I have to have a conversation with myself and go, you know what? It's okay. You're doing XYZ. And like you said, there's been a lot of positives that have come out of doing that. So, yeah, yeah.
Mm. One
Mm.
of the things that strikes me is that, one of the things we didn't say when we started this episode was like what shame actually is. And I
Mm.
think it's important to, kind of rewind a little bit and say, well, shame says that we're bad or we're wrong. And in order for that to be a narrative, there has to be some sort of story that we're buying into, right? And so for you to say, well, I haven't measured up in
Mm.
my career success, there has to be a story underneath that that says the right way to do this is blah.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that we can then make a comparison and say, well, I'm wrong.
Mm.
And so I guess it's interesting. Like, I wonder if you have had that experience of feeling that shame, feeling that sense of shame, and then becoming aware of that story that feeds it. And it sort of sounds like that's been the process, of going, well, hang on, just a second here. Has it been that conscious, or has there been a different way that you have worked with that?
Um, I think it's not something that I have consciously worked at or with. I've tended probably wind the clock back maybe 5 or so years ago, maybe even 3. I would probably just tend to push it back down and not really
Mm.
acknowledge it, and look for other distractions. Man, I was the queen of busy, had the nickname the pocket rocket when when I was in corporate because, and still I love, that whole busyness thing. I got off on that, right? It gave me a sense of purpose. I felt I was achieving stuff because I was doing XYZ in my day. But in reflecting, I can see how that was used as a shield, really, to not question and reflect on what was going on. Um, in some ways, I needed to do that because that was my lifestyle. I had younger kids. My husband was away a lot. A lot fell just on me day to day. So, practically, yes, there was that. But I think, too, that was a way of coping with, you know, um, what was expected of me as the wife and the mother in that situation as well. Like you talked
Mm.
about parenting earlier, definitely. But what has changed for me is that whole creating space now, deliberately so. Um, that has helped me hugely to reflect on why do I have these thoughts and what do I need to do to quiet down the safety police in my head that where they feel they need to show up for me and tell me,
Mm.
what I shouldn't do. So, I have a morning routine, and I've noticed a huge shift in me as a person because I give myself deliberately so, I design it into my day, not to fill it with a whole lot of stuff, but to deliberately create that space so that I can reflect and focus on the sorts of feelings that might be coming up for me. It does
Mm.
that is that kind of what you had in mind with that question, that kind of answer?
Yeah, I mean, I had no preconceived notion, really. I guess it's interesting. There is this sense, when I think of shame and we think of these stories that kind of have to exist in order for shame to exist. You mentioned the safety police, which is a really lovely way to think of it because in some ways that's a big part of it, right? We're trying to stay safe from the perceived judgments that
Flaws.
others might be making of us, right?
Mm, mm.
And yet, as you so accurately described, your girlfriends weren't judging you. They were simply sharing their experience, and the judgment really came from your inner determination of like what was good.
Yeah.
And I think what I sense from that is that when we are sort of trapped in that self-judgment, there's a lot of ourself that we have to give away or push down or ignore, which is I think what you were talking about when you said using busyness as a shield.
Mm.
And I wonder, I almost wonder if it leads us to to kind of just like play it safe in the world, to put on a bit of a persona, or not even, well, I was going to take that back, but I don't think I will. Put on a bit of a persona for who it is we think we should be in order to protect ourselves from that inner judgment police. Have you felt that now that you're creating the space, now that you are more aware of those shame stories? Have you felt that parts of yourself that perhaps were shielded or were hidden or were shrouded in something have been able to feel a little more free and present?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I'm discovering through that more of who I am. And I think
Mm,
that's the beauty in creating the space and reflecting. It makes you think about the stuff that's not so joyous to think about, the negative stuff. But the flip side is I'm also now thinking about, well, what is it that, who do I want to be? Who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? What do I want to experience? And then the curiosity sets in, which
mm,
just fuels that beautiful fire, And I'm finding now that the kinds of questions that I'm asking is more for me, to try and figure out what I want and who I am, not am I enough and do I measure up? Two
mm,
very different sets of questions. One is very much about self discovery and who I am, which I know is going to set me up on a really firm foundation for the next act of my life. I can sense that. And I want more of that. I want to explore those sorts of really deep personal questions as well. I'm unafraid of going there now.
mm. I'm curious if you've discovered anything about who you are and what you want that surprised you.
That is a really good question. Um, I think what surprised me is that I want to do more for me. I have always been a good 2IC, you know, um, put the shoulder in, let's push. Really good 2IC. But now I am surprised about how I'm happy to step aside from that and put myself first, not to be the leader, but to be the leader of myself, I guess. That's probably what it is. And to put myself first more and more. Um, and getting a bit more of a hunger for that and a want of that. That's been a very surprising thing for me. And you might be surprised to hear that because my persona might be something quite different, but um, I've always been a good 2, I see. Mm.
Mm. It's a role that I think we very easily fill. I'm actually thinking about something that happened just earlier today where something was gonna happen in our household that I just didn't like. The timing was just bad. So I was like, "No, I think this actually can't happen this way." And I never would have spoken like that in the past, even though I had, I wanna make some create some context here, but there was sort of like I was a little bit in the back of my mind going, if someone was coming to fix something, and I was like, "Well, if they don't come then, when are they gonna come?" And da 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 da. And I was like, "No, this straight up just does not work for me." I am making that clear. And there is no reason why in my relationship with my family and my husband that I couldn't have always done that.
Mhm,
Absolutely no risk
mhm.
in doing that. And yet the stories that I've told myself over decades is that that was not available to me. And
Yeah.
in little ways, I'm finding myself finding a voice that there's this part of me that goes, "You should have always had that voice. Why was that voice not there?" Because I never wanted to upset people. I never wanted to rock the boat. I never wanted to inconvenience. And yet I've realized more and more how I'm inconvenienced by that. And often
Mm,
the inconvenience that is, I'm trying to avoid for other people is just like insignificant. It just doesn't matter. But there's this
yeah.
story that I have to be the one to kind of control that. So as you're saying what you're saying, I'm thinking of that very small example, and it was just someone coming to fix something on our car in the driveway. Like, it was not a big deal, but there was a real sense of like this can't happen that way, right?
No. Yeah.
And I think we can dismiss those little ways that we perhaps shift old stories. That's such a small example, but for me that was a representation of a big shift that's happened for me, where it's like I am willing to prioritize things that matter to me,
Mm.
and I'm
Mm.
willing to inconvenience other people, even though that has historically made me very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
A little bit of a random side note there, but that's what popped up as you were
No.
speaking.
No, not at all. And I think that's very real. And I would like to say too that me being a good 2IC, that's me choosing that
Mhm.
role. It wasn't expected. I'm an equal partnership with my husband. So it is not that it was expected that I would fall into line or do that. No. Um, so yes, I want to make that really clear too. No, that was my choice. That was my safety zone. That was
Yeah.
my safety
Which is
zone
what
of
we all
choice.
do, right?
Yeah, it is. But to your point about it's a little thing, from little things, big things grow. I really believe that. So, in you acknowledging even that, that will then you can build on that. And it's those micro changes that over time, your brain will go, you know what, I did it for then and that worked for me. I kind of like that. I'm going to do that some more. And I think that's what's happened to me more and more, especially since the kids have become more independent as well. And I know you're not in that stage
Mm.
yourself. Um, so, I had to get used to that change in dynamic, but it has opened up the space. And now I'm, because I can, I've booked to go to India on retreat next March. Now,
It's amazing.
that's amazing. But for me, that's unheard of. Like,
Mm.
that is such a huge leap for me. To take the time out and on my own and, doing something that's been on my dream list for quite some time. Man, that's a big step. So, yeah.
Yeah, did shame come up when you booked it? I'm curious.
Oh, God, yeah, it did.
Mm.
Who dare you? Who do you think you are? You can't do this. And all the reasons for not doing this, right? There was like a shopping list of reasons why I couldn't do it. And thankfully, I had a
Mm.
dear friend side by side who's also going on this. And she said, you know, that's you saying that. And then I went and talked to Paul about it. And I said, what do you think? Should I do this? Yeah, absolutely. Go do this. Why wouldn't you? But it was me, the story I was telling myself, the shopping lists of, nah, for all these reasons you can't. But you're right.
Mm.
Like you said earlier, do they even matter? A lot of this stuff that we throw at
Mm.
ourselves doesn't matter. It just doesn't.
And yet it feels like it does, right? It really feels like it does.
Yes.
I went on a trip in 2022, I guess it would have been, by myself. And that was the first time I'd done that as well. And I experienced a lot of shame and a lot of anxiety in the lead up to that. And I really had to work hard at shedding that while I was having that experience, because it was so familiar to me to go and do something for myself, and it used to be in small ways, maybe a massage or a walk or something, and then to have the whole thing just be, like, almost a waste of time because I was so deeply embedded in my shame whilst I was doing those things, and so all of my self-care practices had almost no impact because I was so deeply embedded in shame at the same time, and so when I went on this trip, it was like, "No, I feel this, I can sense all these stories that are bubbling up, and yet I'm gonna put them over here because I'm choosing me." And that was huge. That was a really huge moment for me as well.
Mm. Choosing me, that is big. Yeah, I
Mm.
get that so much. Yeah, and I
And
bet there's a lot
is
of
that
women listening.
authenticity?
In what way?
Well, I guess I'm thinking, I guess, through the lines of, or along the lines of, if we are kind of being driven by shame and we're trying to protect ourselves all the time, that there is this shielding that goes on, that there's parts of ourselves that perhaps we hold back, that we minimize, that we shrink in order to fit into what we believe is the right way. So
Mm.
when we start to discard that, Is it authenticity that lies on the other side of that, or is it something else?
I think that's part of it for sure. I think that's a driver. Um, and is it an outcome? Is it an enabler? I think it's all of the above. I think it is because I think to choose that, particularly if it is such a big deal, something that is unsafe or has been unsafe in the past, because it's that big, I do think that is inherently showing up as a value. I value me now. And
Mm,
I think that is authenticity. Yeah. And it could even be changing identities too, how we define who we are by what we do and what we have. So
mm,
I think there's a lot wrapped up in that choice.
mm. I and I think, and I'm just coming up with this as we're sort of talking, I'm almost getting like this visual of the great expectations, right? This is what we're talking about. Great expectations, the expectations that we place on ourselves, the expectations that the world places on us,
Yeah.
as almost acting like guideposts, right? And so they kind of almost make it a little easier sometimes to navigate because we know here's where you have to be in order to
Mm,
be okay.
mm,
And so maybe, like you sort of mentioned, the safety police just trying to keep you in there because it feels sort of
mm,
safe, even if it's not true to you.
mm.
I wonder if you've experienced a level of vulnerability or a level of discomfort in starting to move outside of those great expectations and the boundaries that they create, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's like what we've talked about a bit earlier. It's that checking in with yourself, with that reflection, going, is this my story that I'm telling myself? Is it real? Is it just that, a story I'm telling myself? Or can I park it? Can I change it to do a certain thing, feel a certain way that it is aligning more with who I am and what I want and what I need? So I think it's a bit like those bumper cars, where you kind of jump, you hit up against it, or hit up against a barrier to use your analogy, but then then it forces you to come back in to line for a bit, and then you might
Mm,
push the bumper car out again, onto the railing and away you go. And maybe over time those railings dislodge, and you're on a different path altogether. And I think that's what
mm,
midlife, from my experience of midlife, there's a lot of that bumper car action going on to get those railings to bugger off, and to maybe shine a light on another path or multiple paths that I see myself. I don't think there's just one path, by the way. I think, multiple
mm.
paths that I might want to explore and go down. Mm.
I really like that visual, and I'm inclined to think that there is a lot of time then spent in the "I don't know."
Yes. Oh, so much time spent in the I don't know. And I think it's being comfortable in the I don't know. And can I just share? This might sound a bit self indulgent, but that's where I am right now. I have deliberately taken time to explore and not have any preconceived notions of where I'm going to end up. I've got some things that I want to do and some ideas that are in there, but I'm enjoying just being and exploring. And I'm in a very, I'm aware that I'm in a privileged position to be able to do this, absolutely. And I don't take that lightly, and I'm extraordinarily grateful that I can take this space and time for myself. But can I say that I am loving not knowing? There's this whole letting go of the control, the fear, the safety, the fear, controlling the fear to move forward, move through, whatever. But it's that relinquishing of control and going with it and just enabling myself to be present in whatever comes up for me and reflecting on that and just enjoying not knowing. Does
Mm.
that seem wild or I don't know,
It
indulgent?
seems really brave. I mean, do you know what? It's so interesting. The indulgent part, that has to be a story, right? That has to be a great expectation story, because in order for it to be indulgent, there has to be a story that says it has to be another way. But to me, it sounds like the guardrails have blown off, really.
Yeah.
I experience such a impatience sometimes to know, like, who am I? Who am I going to become? What am I going to be doing? There is a sense of wanting to know. And I wonder if that's partly too, because when we look out to others, we have this false belief or false vision that they know, or that there is a concreteness to the people around us. And yet I'm finding very much that who I am is, like, up for exploration. And that's what I hear in what you're saying. And so I actually think it's very brave to be able to sit in that uncertainty, because the great expectations that we've accumulated over half a lifetime tell us that that's not right
You
in a
should
lot of
know.
ways.
You should have a
You should
plan. You should
know.
have a detailed plan,
Mhm.
and you need to have goals, and you need to do blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, 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 like it's yeah, that's right, and if you don't, you're a failure for not knowing. Yeah, yeah, for sure, and no wonder you're not achieving XYZ. You don't have a plan.
But then
I don't
also
have a plan.
the insult that gets added to that injury is that then when you fall short of that plan,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
also deep in shame. So
that
what
bloody
hope is
measuring up.
left?
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, yeah, I've been listening to so many podcasts lately because part of my routine is walking, and I listen to a podcast when I walk. And some of these conversations are so juicy in that what matters? We say this matters, this should matter, this matters to me, and so I do. It's like, and some of these conversations, they're going, that's an illusion. And I'm thinking about that. I'm going, does nothing matter? Oh yeah, things do matter. But I guess what they're saying or suggesting is that don't get hung up on it, because, it might matter right here and now for this context, but, you know, play it forward and it might not matter. So why get so caught up in it? And the whole concept
Mm,
of good and bad, because that's what we're talking about here, measuring up to expectations and falling short, shame kicking in. I am bad, not I've done bad, but I am bad because I don't measure up. Bloody measuring up. Seriously, that's a whole other podcast episode for me, because in my world of helping women feel good in their bodies, in their swimsuits, measuring up, physically measuring, even measuring up to the number on the swing tag, right, is a big fucking deal, and it destroys women. And the same thing, I've got to be a certain weight. No, you need to feel good. We need to bring back feeling and not measuring. And I think I see that measuring up running through so much of our society. Um, and it makes me really sad. And as you might be able to tell, I can sense I'm getting
mm,
innovated. It makes me quite angry
mm.
because it
And so it
sets us
should.
up for failure. Sets us up for failure time and time again. And it's just wrong. Let's get back to feeling. And then you have a greater sense of knowing when you feel rather than
Mhm.
looking at a blind number for an answer. Yeah.
Absolutely. What would be the one thing from your exploration over these last months, years, that helps you to get that reflective space? Because I feel like you've spoken a little bit about, you've got this morning routine, you're prioritizing yourself more than you have ever before. And you're doing something that requires you to hold space for uncertainty, to hold space for the I don't know. Is there something in that routine, or is there something in the way that you speak to yourself, or is there something that you could share that's just like, this is maybe not the whole picture, because it's probably never that simple, but is there a part that you're like, this has been a game changer in terms of how I relate to myself in the way that I create space or relate?
A few things spring to mind. So let's see if I answer the question justly. Um, the morning routine itself is really important. The nature of that. I'm exploring meditation more and more. recently, and my spirituality is growing, and I think tapping into that spirituality is fueling a lot of that self exploration, big time. Um, you know, and wanting to explore energy and vibration, and a lot of this stuff that I've been taught over the years is woo woo. You don't go there. I so want to go there because I feel that that's where there's so much light and love. And I'm not talking about religion here. I'm just talking about a sense of self and a sense of something bigger, you know, very much so. And I think India has got a lot to do with that coming up. That'll be interesting to explore that. Um, and then there's, the journaling that I do as well. I've never been a journaler, never. But Anne Marie Wilshire, a beautiful friend, mutual friend of ours, she put me onto the Artist's Way, Julia Cameron's Artist's Way. And that's been great. That's been a great catalyst for me to write things down. And I can honestly say that I'm loving that. There is a connection. I think it physically connecting the written word with your hand and what's in your head, there is a translation and a connection there. And I think that's extraordinarily helpful. Being in nature, you know, exploring what brings me joy, that's certainly helped. And again, just making it a priority. I can't stress that enough. Things like this don't happen unless you allow them to, and allowing them to happen is making them a priority. So me being vibrant and healthy is my number one focus. So what do I do in my life that enables me to do that? And I think it's the head work as well as the body work. And maybe we should stop saying that they're two separate parts of us because it's all one body, right? So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So does that make sense?
It makes so much sense. I think the thing that underpins everything that you just said is a commitment to being curious. That's what I'm
Yeah.
hearing in what you're saying, is that all of those practices come back to creating space through curiosity.
You're absolutely right. And I've always been a really curious person, but more and more, the more I question and the more I reflect, brings out that curiosity more and more. And I think it's essential. I think it's like oxygen. I really do. I
Mm.
think you've really hit it there. Curiosity is like oxygen. And I can't imagine my life without curiosity. And I know it's making a big impact on who I'm becoming. Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, and it's, in my experience, one of the ways that we can cut through those stories. Because when we're curious, we see multiple possibilities, whereas when we're bought into the shame stories, we only see one. And so, you know, curiosity is actually the topic of our next conversation because we really wanted to dive deeply into that topic. So perhaps that's a nice little segue into talking about what's coming next week. But is there anything else that you want to say about shame, Anita? And I mean, we both kind of started this conversation saying we were a little bit nervous and we were a little bit kind of one foot in either side of a certain line. But I feel like this has been enlightening to me. How are you feeling?
Yeah. No, I've enjoyed it. I've relaxed. I've relaxed into it, and I'm happy for it to just happen and wash over me and through me. So I think it's been a great conversation. It's helped me to reflect a little bit more as well. So thank you for the conversation that has sparked that additional reflection. Um, I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of the stories that we tell ourselves. And they are stories that we do tell ourselves. Others aren't telling them about us necessarily. In most instances, I'm absolutely sure that they're not. And we need to appreciate that that's a way for our brains to keep us safe, if you like. but at what cost? At what cost? And I think if we can be aware that we are not our stories when they hurt us and hold us back, that we can be and show up more around who we are and really get more out of life.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to add too that whilst we are the ones telling ourselves these stories, there's no doubt that we also kind of suck them in from the cultures that we're embedded in. And whilst that is true, I think your point, Anita, is the powerful one, to know that, we get to decide if we opt in or out of that. And it can be scary. And that's why our brain tries to keep us safe, because, safety in the world is about more than physical safety. It's about emotional safety too, and belonging and feeling like we're loved. And so it makes sense that if we've absorbed and continued to, think about things in a certain way, that when we try to step outside of that, our brain's going to be like, oh, you sure? That might not be so safe. And so nothing that we're talking about is necessarily easy or without its, bumper car experience, but it's still so worth it.
Yeah. So absolutely worth it. Yeah. 100%. Go there. It is worth it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how
you
do
for
we
having
want
this
to wrap up
conversation.
today? Yeah. How do we want to wrap this one up, this conversation? What have we covered?
Well, I mean, we've really kind of taken a bit of a winding path, but we've come back time and time again to, what expectations are we unblocking in our midlife journey? So I guess
Yeah.
it would be useful to pose that question, to our listeners of what great expectations are leading to stories that somehow tumble you into a shame story. And as you become more aware of those stories, are you able to get curious and start to see alternative options open to you so that there is that sense of being enough? Yeah, I don't know if I've articulated that particularly well.
No, you have. No, you absolutely have. And I think I would add to that, there's no time like now, unless you're driving and listening to this. But please don't do this then. But just not long after listening to this, just carve out 10 minutes and for yourself and just think about maybe one way that you feel like you're never enough. Because I know as women, that's probably the biggest one that drives, shame. And just be a little bit curious. Just go there. Go, why do I feel this way? What story am I telling myself? And if that's as far as you get, that's okay. If you want to go further, go further. But I implore you to just make that space and time for you. Just do it. Don't think of reasons not to. Yeah.
Love that. Thank you, Anita. This has been a joy, as always. We'll be back again with curiosity next week.
Yeah, we will. Thanks so much, ladies. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye. Thank you for joining us for Midlife Unfiltered. If you loved this episode, you're going to love what's coming next. Be sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you don't miss a thing.
We'd also be delighted, and for sure do a little happy dance, if you took the time to leave us a rating and review. Those not only absolutely make our day, but more importantly, it helps other women who may be wanting something more from their midlife to know about us and to listen in as well. You can connect with us on socials too. You'll find links to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email in the show notes.